So excited to have Rachel with us. We're going to do some virtual traveling along with her. She's going to talk a lot about her movements around the globe, externally, internally. Really can't wait to hear what she's got to share. Um, as usual, put yourself on mute if you're not speaking. For those of us who have auditory processing challenges, we're doing a new thing where we just read the comments in the chat. So if you don't want something read, then just let us know by reading, private or don't read or something. Otherwise, it'll go on up. And we're going to do, Rachel's going to talk, and then we'll have the Q&A afterwards. So I'll turn it over. Thanks, Rachel.
Cool, thank you so much. I'll just start sharing my slides, then we can get cracking. Beautiful. You'll see that okay? Awesome. Okay, so hello everyone, and thank you so much for being here. I can feel my heart really pounding. I'm really nervous to be here, as it's been part of the Casey community for a while. But this is my first time I've ever crawled out of my little observer hole to actually present something. With the amazing speakers that we've had over that time, I've had some lingering imposter syndrome come up with this, as well as some rejection sensitivity. But regardless, I'm here and to explore a very personal year-long journey that served as my preparation for beginning my PhD. So this isn't an academic piece, finding that there struggled to find some literature on AuDHD in general, let alone for our experiences with prolonged nomadic travel. But I do hope to publish this work as part of my PhD. So professionally, my work focuses on the intersection of the arts, of therapy, and of neurodivergence. But today I'm turning the lens inward to share this past year of intense change, packing up my life in New Zealand to travel slowly back to Europe. So before we dive in, just a few important notes. This is my experience only. So this presentation is an autoethnography, and it's framed by how my AuDHD neurotype interacted with and reacted to the world. In the following explorations of countries I visited, I tried to be careful not to brand any way of life as wrong, but simply that some cultural aspects I visited were challenging. I also acknowledge that I come from a place of privilege and had never visited a developing country before, so some of my journal entries may come across as a little blunt. I'm asking for a bit of empathy around this because this journey is just an example of what may happen for others, something to prepare for if you're similarly challenged and you're thinking about giving nomadism a go. And as you know, autism is a constellation, and so no two autistic people experience sensory things necessarily the same way. I've spent a lifetime masking as neurotypical, but as I age, my energy for this has dwindled. It's taking a lot of courage to expose these vulnerabilities in such a public manner rather than hiding the disabling parts of AuDHD that I still hold some internalized ableism and shame for. I sense that I created this presentation as a way to process and admit how challenging different environments can be, in the hope of finding some self-acceptance. Lastly, none of this was possible without the support of my husband. He's been a rock throughout and has very kindly given permission to have our photos shared. Okay, so here's a glimpse at what we'll be covering today. It's been challenging to fit a whole year of my life into 1 hour, but hopefully we won't run over time. And as Dawn said, if you have any questions forming, please save them for the end, where I hope to have enough time to answer them. So during this presentation, I encourage you to stim, to move, to draw, to take notes in any way that helps you to listen and absorb information. I'll be reading from a pre-prepared script, as this is my own way of presenting with self-care and ensuring that I stay on track, as I can get easily swayed or dive off into tangents when flowing naturally. As for the content itself, it's a rhizomatic bricolage of photographs, artwork, WhatsApp messages, journal entries, metaphors, and lived experience stories, all collected over the 11 months of this trip, living out of a suitcase and shifting home every 1 to 4 weeks. My voice acts as the narration of this journey, as I've attempted to interpret this into some kind of a linear story, but that's not normally my strong point. Okay, let's do this. So a little bit about me. So I'm born in the UK. I've got Jewish and British ancestry. I did a degree in fine art photography at the University in Derby 2007. I lived in New Zealand since 2012 and am now living in Germany. I worked 8 years in New Zealand as a creative arts therapist, having completed my master's degree there in 2017. I was diagnosed autistic November 2023, but I discovered that I was autistic back in 2018. I'm a certified autism specialist, and I got that in 2024. I'm the visual arts editor at Aut, the Journal of Autistic Culture. Yay! And I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Marburg, which I started about a month ago. Okay, so that's enough about me. How it all began. So my husband and I have always rebelled against accommodation norms. Our relationship began in New Zealand in a conscious community following Buddhist principles, where we lived for the first 2 years of our union. During that time, we've lived in a tent, a hut, a van, a tree house, and lastly, in a caravan. We joked that we'd never once lived in a house or a space with more than one indoor room. We both had a yearning to find community, to living sustainably, and to find a cheap way to live that supported our then undiagnosed neurodivergence. Affording rent was a challenge with our struggle to work full time, and so we became very creative at finding opportunities to save money by living simply. However, we realized that with our sensory needs, this worked well in summer, but was rather uncomfortable come wintertime. Being close to nature was a dream when the sun shone, but when storms hammered our rather limited foundation homes, I would have meltdowns from the unexpected noises and shaking of the walls and floors. After 4 years of living this way, we'd had enough. With a mix of determination and luck, my husband found a job working for an organics certification company where he could work remotely once he'd finished his training, and my creative arts therapy began to thrive. So we finally had access to finances for the first time. We knew we wanted to go somewhere to put roots down and quite literally foundations, but we weren't sure where. Firstly, however, we needed to move to Wellington for 6 months for my husband's training. So just before moving to Wellington is when I received my autism diagnosis, which was a huge relief. I moved my business online for the trip and dramatically cut back on work to allow me to take a bit of a break. I used these 6 months of temporary living to process my diagnosis and rethink my life, finding a sustainable way to have a career, exploring my preferred clothes, foods, and hobbies. So it's essentially my way of beginning to unmask. We loved the city life, albeit noisy and overstimulating at times. After completing his training, we returned to the top of the South Island and felt inspired by our trip. A few months went by and we finally sold our caravan from our last attempt at finding community, and we felt untethered, so my novelty-seeking side got really excited. All of our things were still in storage from when we shifted to Wellington, and so we realized we were all packed up and could move anywhere we liked. As soon as we looked at ideas, we got most excited about going back to Europe, where our families were, and found that we could do our master's and PhD for free in Germany. It felt like an exciting option, as it wouldn't be too much of an effort now that everything felt pretty much packed up and good to go. And whilst, yes, we could have hopped on a plane and travelled the grueling 30 hours back to be immediately in the Northern Hemisphere, we thought instead, why not make the most of this opportunity? With us both having an income from working online, why not take the leisurely road home and travel slow? I imagined living like we did in Wellington, but visiting more places, having everything we needed in 3 suitcases, getting to know new areas briefly, and leaving before it became monotonous and boring. I was so excited for untethered, nomadic living. So the plan. This was to visit Japan, Vietnam, Thailand, and then the UK before arriving in our new home of Germany. However, we couldn't leave for another 6 months as my husband's parents were coming to visit in February, which was all planned before we decided to jump ship. That led to a question. What do we do until then? We were itching to leave, so we couldn't wait 6 months. My ADHD side came up with a brilliant solution. How about house sitting in New Zealand? We could finish selling and packing our things, send it off already to Germany on the cargo ships, and then be free to explore other areas in New Zealand, wherever the house sitting opportunities manifested. This became my first real noticing of my AuDHD lived experience. I initially fall in love with creative, clever ideas that involve change and experiencing new things, but then my anxiety arrives days later to worry about all the ways it will go wrong. So the project began. Sell, sell, sell. I entered a hyper-focused state for 4 weeks. My husband and I worked as a flawless machine. Me photographing and organizing the items to sell, and him uploading the images and corresponding with prospective buyers. My husband was particularly good at his role, often selling things so quickly they'd be gone by the time I'd come home from work. I had another noticing here, how I found that I loved the dopamine of being able to check things off my list as sold, but then I'd mourn my beautiful object that I'd grown very fond of simply by it being in my home. I grew deep attachment to things and found this somewhat unsettling, not being able to say goodbye to a thing, having not been prepared to actually lose it. It felt like a million little deaths, slowly dissolving my sacred space as if the items were just being deleted. Yet I also felt freer with every disappearance. A strange, contradictory feeling that still irks me. Some items we sold, I've completely forgotten the story of their departure, only knowing now that they've gone from my worldview. Stolen, but paid for. Erin Manning speaks of this when she talks about autistic perception, in that we autistics don't necessarily separate objects from subjects. For instance, I've named every car I've ever owned, and find sometimes that there's a comfort in things that feel akin to friendship. Manning explains how autistic empathy reaches beyond its human-centric, neuronormative constraints. We feel empathy for everything, not just people. I love that theory, and found this at play here when I unexpectedly struggled saying goodbye to my object friends. So by sheer luck and a lot of hard grafting, we managed to sell everything we needed to fit all our remaining items in our car, ship everything off to Germany, and booked our first house sit on the North Island just a few days after the movers came. And just like that, we boarded the ferry and made our way north. The journey had begun. For over 5 months, my husband and I completed 6 house-sitting assignments across New Zealand's North Island as the experimental phase of our nomadic year, caring for 30 animals, including dogs, cats, ducks, chickens, fish, and a gerbil. We consciously sought out longer stays, 2 weeks or more, to establish a sustainable rhythm of travel, unpack, stay, and unpack, using daily briskies, which is our word for brisk walks, for mental health and to create an inner map of each new location, which significantly reduced my anxiety. Despite enjoying the beautiful accommodations and falling in love with caring for the animals, the experience was challenging. It was marked by intense anxiety about property damage, the draining masking that I had to do with owners, and the emotional difficulty of constantly leaving the animals I'd bonded with. A major stressor was our homeless state, which drove us to ignore our gut feelings to secure continuous house sits to avoid temporary accommodation costs. This mistake was highlighted by one event that was a disastrous, short-lived 6-hour drive for a week-long sit in a cold, chaotic, and emotionally heavy environment that ended up being cancelled shortly after we arrived. This taught me a crucial lesson about prioritizing my AuDHD needs and environment over saving money, and trusting my gut when a house sit didn't quite seem right when booking it. Ultimately, these house sits were invaluable for identifying my ideal future lifestyle, including a need for a tidy space, a good kitchen for baking, and the specific type of pets and community we wanted. Despite having space due to postponing my PhD study to reapply to a German university, my house sitting time was not just pet cuddles. There were moments of heightened distress, made worse by the consistently changing environments. In November 2024, concurrent with the sudden house sit cancellation that forced us into an Airbnb, I discovered my bank account had been fraudulently altered on a contract invoice, triggering a prolonged and severe spiral of perseverative cognition, which is a loop of panicked and spiraling thoughts. During this unique form of hell, I lost my ability to speak, felt intense bodily sensations, and struggled to eat, sleep, and function for days, often waking to frantically write out my thoughts. The core trigger was a profound sense of injustice and powerlessness, because the organization repeatedly dismissed my legitimate claim, forcing me to involve the police and threaten legal action, which ultimately resolved the 2-month ordeal. The silver lining was that the spaciousness in my schedule allowed me to be fully present with this emotional process, leading to a deeper understanding of my own order and the significant way my environment and emotional triggers affect my ability to function. Here's what I wrote at the time, with the images on the slide being made with the help of AI. I have a raccoon that lives in my head. This raccoon consistently requires being fed. It ransacks my mind's cupboards, tearing through packets, tins, wrappers, exposing the delicious sugary treats that had until then remained uncovered and hidden. With a steady stream of information and time to hunt through what is food and what is inedible discards, the raccoon is calmly noshing away. This is a usual hyperfocus, and it feels good, but it needs time and quiet for the raccoon to do his sorting. In times of distress, however, a flood of jumbled up items is poured over his head. He's drowning in information. There's no time to sort through what is food and what is plastic, and so he attempts to eat it all to find air. Only he can't process plastic and so regurgitates it. The walls are closing in as more and more is poured into the space. This is me writing about what that loop spiral felt like. The walls closing in and slowly drowning from thinking over and over what had happened and what words to use to fix it. It was too much to digest, and I found it impossible to gather my thoughts amongst the sense of urgency I felt in my body-mind. This exploration then went further. I wrote, "My mind is full of doors. All of these doors are closed, and I don't have access to them until I choose one to open. Opening more than one at once leads to overwhelm. When I open a door, inside is a whole galaxy. This is a hyperfocus. When I go through this door, my previous reality disappears, and all I can see or know is this galaxy around me. I'm completely immersed and fixated on understanding and navigating this space. It feels magical as I make connections between the planets, giving them names and calculating their relationship to one another. I write, create databases, or draw to make sense of this foreign space. And it's beautiful inside this space. Each bit of knowledge is guided by my intuition, feeling like there's something inside of me guiding my next step. I forget I have a body and I can't hear my internal needs. I'm just completely immersed on whatever the next step is to understanding this phenomenon and recording it. I feel possessed and not in control. I just know I need to finish it for it to feel complete, and I do not choose when and if this happens." As I swirl around the galaxy, there are potential exit points as I come back around again to where I entered. This can be at the end of covering one area of this hyperfocus, where it'd be easy to put it down and pick it back up again at another time. And this is when I can leave. To try leave when I'm part through cataloguing this phenomenon would take much more energy to not only reach the doorway, but to find out where I was when I last exited. Usually it would mean the way back would be lost, which is deeply unsettling. When I leave and close the door, I forget it all until I consciously, or something externally occurring, opens this door again. If I leave and keep the door open, my underbrain keeps thinking about it under the surface of my cognition and informing me when I have spaciousness to hear its wisdom. What this means is that I'm resuming my human tasks, like cooking dinner, using the toilet, driving my car, etc., and I'll get a sudden thought clicking this phenomenon with other galaxies I've explored in the past, or suggesting a reframe of a previous one. Now, an important note here is I've learned the hard way that I have to live my life consciously. Mindfulness isn't just a choice, it's a survival tool. Every day I must carefully choose activities, depending what may or may not spark a new hyperfocus. If I want to learn a new skill or study a new topic, I must carefully carve out time to do this, else it will either be a waste of time and not stick, as I'm not allowing enough time to explore this galaxy, and therefore not having the inertia to even walk through the door into the hyperfocus. Or I'm getting stuck in it and not allowing enough time to get out again without exhaustion or upset. It being so vast that I don't have the time or correct tools to make sense of it before being sucked out of the door, and it leaking all over my daily reality, which results in a loop spiral. It is this reason that I don't have many hobbies, as I find it too hard to learn new things without having time to learn everything about it first. There's another aspect to all this. When I'm in a hyperfocus galaxy, I can only focus in on one thing at a time. This makes the whole thing a lot harder. After I wrote this, I lost inertia, interest, and focus, so I stopped writing. This tends to be how I finish most of my journal entries. The next day, I was knocked into a spin again. This time, it was around changing my university to do my PhD, and not quite understanding the language or expectations from doing a PhD in another country. After beginning to spin out, I walked with my husband to try communicate the issue. This didn't work so well, so I turned inwards after regulating my nervous system enough so that I felt safe to do so, and I wrote. First, I looked physically. When I closed my eyes, it felt like the world was spinning, like my eyes were going round and round and round and round. My feet then began to itch and tingle, asking for a massage. I did this, and I began to calm. I then ate my breakfast, and then I began to pace, feeling my feet on the floor. As I did all of this, a metaphor grew in my mind. I was in this hyperfocus galaxy, and it's the biggest one I've ever seen. I was in a spacesuit, and it was running out of oxygen. I'd been thrown into a spin and was completely disoriented. I couldn't tell where the nearest planet was anymore, or what direction I was going in, and I felt lost and panicked. So this spinning of my suit then represents the same thing I explored in the drowning of the hungry raccoon. Rumination is when something unexpected happens that goes against what I know to be true, when my hyperfocus gets interrupted somehow by an external force. The spinning I show here within a galaxy is how it feels. There is no up, no down, and certainly no ground to catch my breath on. It's especially the case when emotion takes over and I no longer have the time to gather myself and map things out clearly. I also sensed that this situation was made worse by my already groundless week, where the path that I had anticipated being on at the house sit was suddenly removed from view, and I was still catching up on this new norm of being in a random Airbnb in a town I hadn't researched yet. This was a really tricky week to navigate, but from that I was able to become much clearer on what my needs were and why I'd been in so much distress. So, with my house sitting learnings giving me a clear picture of my needs, I then dedicated myself to intensely planning our 3-month exploration of Vietnam, deliberately choosing 1 month stay in Da Nang, then in Ninh Binh, and then Sapa, while heeding my husband's advice to avoid sensory overloaded cities like Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City. For 3 weeks, I was in a state of hyperfocus again, researching accommodation, food, and culture daily, finding it challenging to navigate the overwhelming number of online options and discern between legitimate listings and scams. Despite the advice to secure long-term rentals in person, I needed the safety of a guaranteed right home waiting for us, adhering to a strict criteria that included 2 desks, air conditioning, and walking distance to local food while being away from busy tourist areas. Additionally, during this research galaxy, I also finalized our subsequent travel to Koh Samui in Thailand to avoid the rainy season in other Southeast Asian countries, as I felt it was crucial to complete all major planning while in this focused state, anticipating that potential research difficulties, such as restricted website access in Vietnam, would stop me doing this whilst I was there. So, leaving New Zealand, which had been my home and sanctuary for almost a third of my life, was profoundly difficult, primarily because I deeply struggle with change, viewing it as a type of death that triggers panic over lost connections to people, places, and objects. This fear of saying goodbye, which historically led me to bolt from situations like my initial move to New Zealand, which I'd pretended to myself was only temporary, made my final weeks of grieving and preparing for our departure exceptionally hard, despite my desire to travel and to be in Europe. The immense stress of this transition, coupled with a doom-touting vaccination nurse's warnings of the health warnings of being in Southeast Asia, triggered debilitating and random panic attacks that began in February and are still continuing to this day. These terrifying episodes, often waking me from sleep with a sense of impending doom and physical distress, left me feeling completely done with uncertainty and travel. When the time came for the final departure, the overwhelming nature of the airport experience made me unable to be present. Instead, I moved through the necessary steps on autopilot, listening to music and focusing on distraction, concluding that this detachment was the only way my autistic body-mind could manage to leave and start the new adventure. And bam, just like that, 11 hours of dissociating later, I was in Japan. I was in freaking Japan. I hadn't processed leaving New Zealand, so I certainly hadn't prepared myself for actually being in Japan. I suddenly forgot all of my panic and felt an immense excitement for a country I'd dreamed of visiting my whole life. Throughout my childhood, I was obsessed, filling my room with anything Japan related, watching anime with friends, adding random bits of Japanese to my lexicon, and even renaming myself to Rei, spelled R-E-I, from the age of 10, which was the name of a character from an anime called Neon Genesis Evangelion. I only stopped going by Rei about 4 years ago. Japan has always fascinated me, from the stories of shogun and samurai, to the fashion style, the language, and the ideal of imperfection being beautiful, wabi-sabi, that I'd focused my photography degree thesis on. With all the stress and anxiety leading up to this moment, I'd forgotten all of that. It all suddenly hit me, and my dopamine-seeking self was back in the driving seat. Our plan in Japan was to visit as much as possible within our short 10-day stay. So we were only staying 1 to 2 nights in each location. We decided it'd be smart to store our 3 suitcases at the airport and try to live out of backpacks for the duration. Oh, the relief. Not having suitcases to lug around on trains was worth the limitation in outfits. Despite my initial anxiety that the constant travel in Japan would trigger panic attacks and prevent the downtime I usually needed, I found myself energized and able to shift into a mode of excited hyperfocus, barely resting as we explored Tokyo, Kyoto, Hakone, and other cities. The trip, which included bullet trains, a traditional ryokan stay, seeing Mount Fuji, and enjoying onsen, was a wild ride that was nearly frictionless, even though I did injure a tendon from clocking over 30,000 steps on our first day in Tokyo. I noticed that the outside world disappeared as I immersed myself in the amazing efficiency of Japan, which felt incredibly autism friendly due to its clear signage, designated queue spaces, punctuality, and sensory friendly rules like silence on public transport. The simple food system, facilitated by tablet ordering and ubiquitous convenient konbini, made meeting my needs easy, allowing me to fully embrace the country's clear structure. Although the high pace meant I had poor interoception and was nearly exhausted by the end of our 10 days, the sensory balance of loud, bright city experiences with peaceful Zen nature spots left me completely fulfilled but ready for rest. Upon arrival in Vietnam for a planned month-long, supposedly restful stay in Da Nang, I was immediately overwhelmed by the intense humidity, the barrage of taxi drivers vying for our attention, and the sheer sensory contrast with orderly Japan. Our initial apartment, while quiet, safe, and air-conditioned, had painful fluorescent lighting and limited natural light, which became an unpleasant cocoon for the first 7 days, as I found it too chaotic to leave. The sheer intensity of the outside environment, the noise, the incessant flow of motorbikes, the polluted air, and the lack of pavements turned my dream of dining out into the most challenging part of my day. I hadn't realized how much I rely on visual order, as navigating the unpredictable streets, the chaotic traffic requiring me to wear noise-cancelling headphones all the time and have my husband literally hold my hand to cross the road, the constant construction, and the random mix of residential and business buildings was a severe sensory assault. Struggling to grasp the order and predictability of the city, my first impressions were extremely negative, leading me to significantly doubt my ability to thrive in Japan. At the end of the first week, I wrote the following in my journal. I've been trying to be present with this. This being a state I know very well, and yet when it's passed, I completely forget or underestimate its impact. I think this is burnout, which comes more regularly these past months since I've been nomadic. What it feels like is almost as if I become an NPC, so a non-playable character, where I forget my deep backstory and my wishes for the future, simply living in the now and attending to my absolute basic fetal needs, so feeding, defecating, and sleeping. I struggle to plan having a small window of now to live in, where anything beyond this box of perhaps 1 to 2 hours is incomprehensible. I feel as if I'm floating at the mercy of life itself, on a raft with no paddle, yet I'm content like the goldfish with no future to worry about or past to regret. I spent a lot of time either sleeping or binging Apple TV shows, which feed my need for progression and time moving forward. But left to my own devices away from these, and of my body-numbing witnessings, I'm simply blank. After a few days of this, I begin to remember that I'm a person, that opportunities lie outside of my fishbowl, and desires to plug into them re-emerge. Piece by piece, I come back into personhood, and forget this mode I'd been in, as after all there was a little I present to know it or what was occurring. I notice that myself writing now, this is the process of this beginning. The current burnout occurred after having traveled in Japan for 10 days without rest, true rest, which is a space on my own without being perceived, and space without external sensory disturbance leading my life. At the time, I was fine, or I thought I was fine. I have the ability to mask even to the point I'm unaware I'm not okay myself. This was a time of much change and excitement, walking 20,000 steps a day on average, and changing locations every 2 days. I got moments of rest during trips on the bullet train and bus rides where I noticed that it was impossible to read or even check social media but an absolute need to simply listen to music and process what had happened before and what will happen next. I'm learning here how to adapt my AuDHD needs when on the move so that I can live a life full of travel, adventure, and growth like any holistic person has access to if money allows, without them having to think about it. But arriving in Vietnam, my second destination where I'll be residing for 3 months, I had an inkling that there would be a consequence to this rapid change environment I'd rhythmed into this past fortnight. And this is the consequence: having to spend a week inside, allowing my body mostly to recover from the chaos still spinning around my head, and for my body to catch up and finally land here with me. I sense that me writing is a way of finally accepting this reality. And I'm a little shocked at how much in denial I've been of this, to the point that I live in theory most of the time. This means when I choose life paths, I choose it based on theory, or from TV shows where I've imagined my life as a neurotypical like I've seen, forgetting my own struggles or just wanting to ignore them, thinking that that's how I could push through to do the things I yearn to in my heart. Living in theory is like letting the things that excite you rule your decision making without thinking it through practically. In a practical sense, I do need to acknowledge that I become overstimulated from the world, just doing its normal, everyday thing, almost like I have an allergy to modern society. I can get overstimulated by weather, by inharmonious landscapes, by busy streets, and by crowded spaces. Let's use an example. My husband asked me at one point during the Japan trip what I wanted to eat for dinner. I responded in a slight whip-snap tone with, "I don't know yet." As I dug deeper, surprised at my own reaction to as simple and innocent question, I realized I was in a different mode. My body was struggling with the cold and the snow, and my brain was distracted with the "where are we going next?" I didn't know what I want to eat later, as I was in a process already. The journal entry abruptly finishes there, and reading it back now, I'm drawn to this concept of living in theory. Seeing the initial excitement of saying yes to something may be the desire for novelty and dopamine, rather than something I'm doing to mask. I genuinely want to do these things at the time, but struggle to carry them out at the time due to overwhelm and overstimulation. I simultaneously want to and don't want to do all the things. Despite the initial overwhelm in Vietnam, the food was a major highlight, particularly the flavors and textures which aligned with my sensory preferences. We managed to establish a new routine, using the first week to recover and adjust, then locking in predictable daily meals to navigate the surrounding chaos. Daily, we'd eat a simple home-cooked breakfast, and then I found a local pho spot for lunch that didn't require crossing any main roads. For dinner, we ate bun cha at the same restaurant every night, much to the owner's amusement. This repetitive ordering wasn't about lack of adventure, but rather an essential coping mechanism. Once I found a dish I loved, the predictability of having the same food was a soothing thread of order that minimized the risk of disappointment in an otherwise overwhelmingly sensory environment. Another journal entry 2 weeks in. What I do know from this past fortnight is how much new impacts me. In an example, on the weekend we visited Hoi An, a touristy area just south of Da Nang where we're staying. In the taxi en route, I couldn't talk or tear myself away from staring out the window. It's like being shown a string of new information continuously on a screen, and it being consistently new that you can't take your eyes away. It's exhausting but enthralling. If I don't look, I feel lost and afraid, like anything can happen from my worst imaginings. I must absolutely look so I can take this in and find a new map of normal. Then when we arrived, upon leaving the hotel, I noticed I had to walk in one direction, though my husband had an opposite route in mind. As I walked, I noticed how much I needed to just walk in this one direction, appearing to know where I was going. I wanted to avoid being seen, noticed, or interrupted by something unpredictable. I was in a panic. I don't know this place, these people, and these shops and cafes. It was too much new, and I was in flight mode. hoping to get there as soon as possible so I could pause and take it all in. But for that, I need a bubble, a place to pause away from the noise, the chaos, the lights, and being perceived by the people, and all of the movement I couldn't keep track of. It's terrifying. New is absolutely terrifying. It's like I need to map out what this is when I'm in new, and life is happening too quickly for that to happen. Our routine in Vietnam slowly took shape, balancing the week's work obligations with weekend adventures to manage my AuDHD needs. We maintained a strict weekly structure, anchored by regular meal times and work, but I noticed I could only sustain routine and obligations for a maximum of 3 days before reaching burnout. To counteract this, we utilized the weekends for what a colleague of mine calls floaty brain time, which allows for fluidity, creativity, and presence without any predetermined plans, structures, or rules, satisfying my novelty-seeking desire. This regular swing between structure, which helps with stability in work, and spontaneous flow, which prevents burnout and overwhelm, was a necessary balance. Staying too long in either mode would lead to being lost or unproductive, a concept I actually originally explored years ago in my master's degree thesis. So my master's degree thesis was an arts-based autoethnography and unexpectedly laid the groundwork for understanding my current AuDHD swinging pendulum by exploring my need to alternate between two distinct modes during a difficult period. I found I moved from the need for writing, which created structure and order to make sense of my lived experience, to the need for art making, using unpredictable sculpture and photography for process-oriented expression and freedom. Staying too long in the structured side led to a sense of suffocation and overwhelm, causing overthinking and making tasks feel unsurmountable. Conversely, spending too much time in the fluid side resulted in decision fatigue, numbness, and depression, causing me to lose direction and meaning. Without realizing it at the time, this thesis, which was originally intended to help heal childhood trauma through art, created a vital template for how I needed to live. A template that perfectly captures the essential balance between the need for structure and the need for fluidity to maintain my mental equilibrium. By the third week in Vietnam, I was settled enough to deeply observe my challenges, recognizing that the shock of overwhelm frequently hit me after my novelty-seeking driven weekends of exploration. Following the aforementioned visit to the intense sensory environment Hoi An, I wrote about the subsequent burnout. I said, upon arriving home, I'm exhausted, but keep trying to do the things as per my schedule. I feel this need to cancel everything I must do, and even simple tasks like brushing my teeth or taking my supplements becomes a mammoth task of will and self-pressure. After a few days of rest, I began to crave a new hyperfocus, finding my routine-based weeks of limited work hours filled only with numbing activity. I realized that my mind operates in one of two states, blank or hyperfocus. And being without a new subject felt like being lost at sea, lacking the purpose and drive that a focused beam of attention provides. This blank state was initially interpreted as poor memory, but I concluded it was part of my monotropic way of attending to the world, where anything outside of the beam is forgotten to prevent being overwhelmed by my consistently changing interests and hyperfocuses. Whilst the blank state, i.e. being in the lobby or being in NPC mode, was necessary to rest after a hyperfocus is concluded, such as with the 10 days of intense travel in Japan, being too long in the lobby was being too long in the fluid state from my swinging pendulum diagram, leading to a depressive state and a feeling of purposelessness. During a PhD supervision session, I described this feeling of being adrift without a hyperfocus by drawing a boat, drawing myself as a marionette, which is my usual way of showing my body in pictures, as this is how it feels to be in my body, as a puppeteer needing to tell each body part to move. It took a while to realize that I'd drawn myself paddling against the direction that the boat was going. This epiphany showed me that my boat was already going in the direction it needed to, focusing on all the new and all the constant adaptations that nomading requires. The massive changes in environment was a hyperfocus in itself and was taking all of my energy to process. I couldn't take on a new hyperfocus as there was no room in my body-mind for more new. My paddling in the image was me fighting this fact. After successfully completing our first month, we took an overwhelming sleeper bus from Da Nang to Ninh Binh, where we mistakenly booked our accommodation in the less touristed city, intending to save money and eat locally. Instead, we found it difficult to find food, and when out, we became a constant source of attention, which is a surreal and unsettling experience, as the Asian crowd stared, waved, giggled, and took our pictures, especially fascinated by my husband's large bushy beard. This made it hard for me to settle in public, constantly feeling on show. While our new homestay was divine with good light and space, having to walk through the family's living room area whenever we wanted to go outside felt intrusive and strange. Food remained a challenge, but I established a routine of eating pho at a nearby place until a local man, possibly drunk, began to aggressively hit on me. Speaking Vietnamese I didn't understand, stroking my hair and inviting me to live with him. I was so freaked out and unsure what to do that I ran, feeling incapable of telling him to back off and of protecting myself. The weekends, however, were full of delicious adventure near nature, allowing us to climb the treacherous Moa Cave staircase, which was a huge achievement for my poor balance, and rent bikes, which, though stressful for my processing speed, were a welcome means of escape. There was one other confusing incident at one of these trips, where we walked through a small village of locals, and a small boy approached me and slapped me on the arm after his friends asked us where we were from. It still confuses me what happened there. I began to embrace sitting in my metaphorical boat, experimenting with what happens when I stop trying to force a new hyperfocus, which led to some more self-discoveries visualized through art. Prompted by my therapist to draw my true self behind the mask, I created an image beyond my physical identity, showing light radiating from my marionette body. A second artwork made during a period of embracing doing nothing revealed the magical swirls and new ideas that emerged from still water when I stopped trying to steer, realizing that I must leave the emergence of a new hyperfocus to serendipity or let it go entirely. I again saw this place of stop as the lobby, the empty room that is necessary for transitions between hyperfocuses, between the rooms and between the galaxies. My supervisor and I discussed this as an inherent AuDHD coping mechanism, allowing me to deep dive into one thing at a time, the autistic trait, while having a multitude of potential interests available, the ADHD trait. The main issue with this mechanism is that when in the lobby, there's no memory of the rooms that I've been in before because the information is so vast, it must be locked away to allow me to function. My memory often goes as a necessary compromise to sustain my deep focus level, meaning I must rely on strategies like note-taking to retain anything from a finished galaxy, or I risk losing everything I've learned. Our third month took us via sleeper bus to Sapa, a mountain town near the Chinese border at the foot of Mount Fansipan, which I initially hoped would offer peace due to its higher altitude and peaceful scenery. However, my optimism quickly dissolved when the weather turned sour, replacing sunny days with persistent fog and rain, which combined with our dark, limited room and the unsettling presence of face-sized spiders made the sodden walkways challenging. My discomfort was compounded by the distressing realities of tourism. A visit to Cat Cat Village revealed a Disneyland-esque attraction engaged in harmful animal abuse, like a horse I saw being hit for falling asleep, and the negative socio-economic impact on locals. I witnessed child labour, with Hmong children forced to sell crafts or dance on the street, making me feel that my very presence was ethically compromising and destroying this precious culture. By the end of the month, I was in a full depressive state, counting the days for us to leave. I wrote, "It's been a wee while." Ooh. Hang on. It's been a wee while. I'm over Vietnam. The chaos, the dirt, the noise, the pollution, the aggressive selling. I'm done. In 4 days, we leave for Hanoi, and then 6 days later for Thailand. I'm so excited to go, but so anxious. Leaving means going into the unknown again. And whilst I'm over the intensity of here, I also have no idea what awaits me on the other side of it. Perhaps this isn't as bad as I think, and over there is worse. That's what's been happening here, that each time I fantasize about the next location, I get bored and overstimulated all over again. At least in Thailand is the last stop. I had a knowing before I left here that it would be too much. A sickness I felt that brought on panic attacks week before leaving. All that unknown, all that travel, I am so sick of it now. I yearn for stillness, for peace, for not moving. We even stopped exploring the area, but this is also in part because the weather has been so unpredictable. We haven't seen the sun in over a week, and even when we did, the clouds would soon move over and take our vision away. There really is nothing to do here when there's no visibility. I stopped writing there, feeling the full misery of my situation and hopelessness of being stuck in a place with nothing to do and yearning for home. Here is where I started wondering. My unhappiness might not necessarily be about the place, but that I'd got the balance wrong. That being more than 2 weeks in a place was way too long. But on the other hand, being away from home, from a proper base for more than a month, was also too much. I started wondering that maybe nomadic life really wasn't meant for me. As we left Sabha on the bus, I cried with relief, feeling that I was coming out of a dark, isolated hole and coming back into community again. I also felt nauseous, afraid and fearful of what I would find in our next location, exhausted by the constant, unpredictable change and the inevitable wait for the next change to emerge. My novelty-seeking side was hopeful, excited for something new, but my stability-seeking side was tired and over the disappointment travel had given me so far. I had surrendered to the voice that was telling me that this nomadic travel had all been a huge mistake, and I never should have left New Zealand. Luckily, this time was different, and my perspective shifted. I attribute this to our accommodation, which was heavenly, as well as being in a place for only a few days, giving me enough new to be satisfied. This time around, we'd booked an entire apartment to ourselves with a sofa, kitchen, and even a separate bedroom. It had been about 3 months since we last had more than one room together, and this felt like bliss. The space was well cared for, clean, and tasteful. There was a dramatic contrast to the last place that simply had 2 double beds and a dining room table in an otherwise empty, soulless room. This place had beautiful lighting, lamps, wooden floors, and art. From here, my energy came back, and we spent most days out. Perhaps it was also different after having been cooped up for 3 weeks straight with no sunshine, and now the sun was back in full force. I found myself being drawn to shopping centres, enjoying the pristine upmarket setting, where it wasn't necessarily about having expensive items for sale, but more because it was clean, uncluttered, and spacious. These were a great reprieve from the extreme heat that once took over our senses. I'm not sure if Hanoi was different, or if I was, but this time around I loved every second of this final week of Vietnam. The food choices were plentiful, allowing us to enjoy bun cha daily in the same place President Obama had visited some years ago, as well as being able to eat Japanese and Korean food again. Hanoi felt like the Goldilocks sweet spot for my AuDHD swinging pendulum, and the perfect amount of time to enjoy its vibrancy. The traffic was still challenging, but by now we had somewhat adjusted to this, finding quieter routes around and taking grabs for longer journeys. This was a good week. There was something that irked me about having too many steps until I landed in Europe. Too many steps meant too many opportunities for something to go wrong. It reminds me of why I struggle playing board games, as I find planning my moves enjoyable, but I'm not able to adapt when someone else's turn disrupts my well-organized strategy. I found myself counting down the plane rides until I reached my destination, then began counting the number of different beds I'd need to sleep in before we got to my own bed again. Counting somehow was comforting, having extra dopamine every time we reached a new place. And I could turn to my husband and say, only 3 more planes to Europe, or only 5 more beds to sleep in before Europe, when finishing with an accommodation. The other thing I noticed was how surreal and difficult it was to process suddenly being in another country. This was especially potent to feeling when leaving Vietnam and being just 2 hours on a flight, and bam, we were in Thailand. I wondered if this was something other people felt, a disconnection with traveling how our ancestors once traveled. I almost wish that I could have walked instead, as this would have given me the time to really feel this change happen gradually, rather than it being so sudden and hard to process. My body-mind felt like it was always trying to catch up, but never managing to, with life and travel happening so quickly that I was not quite able to be present to it. There was too much new to take in. I was glued once again to the glass screens of our travel carriers. First the plane, then the taxi taking us to our overnight stay in Bangkok, and then the next day with another flight, bus, and then boat to our new home of Koh Samui Island. Thailand's island of Koh Samui provided a stunning, paradisiacal environment where I regained my independence and joy, largely due to the beauty, the peace, my daily beach walks, and a newfound love for outdoor swimming pools that offered a surprising, soothing sensory experience. Crucially, the island's tourist popularity meant I was no longer the subject of relentless staring. Despite these positive changes, the first week was a struggle, the change and the lack of purpose, leading me to write. I'm now in Thailand. I find myself being a little lost, a little bit NPC and without purpose again. There's something in the way of me and this that is blocking me somehow. I realized that this discomfort stemmed from the liminal space between hyperfocuses, where my contrasting needs fought. The need for stillness to rest versus the fact that a hyperfocus is a motion, it's a traveling, it's a journey of movement. I discovered that sitting still or being motionless is an impossibility for me. Writing, I'm at my happiest when I'm in physical motion. I can be in deep thought for hours, listening to music and processing deep subjects that seemingly emerge from nowhere, but only if I'm in a vehicle in motion. The second we pause at a traffic light, an airport, etc., I'm stopped in my thoughts. It feels itchy, tense, unpleasant. It feels the same now. I've stopped. Reading this back now, I realize that I need movement to process thought. I need motion to organize vast galaxies of information, whether that be some kind of vestibular physical sense of movement or having a desirable hyperfocus's gravitational pull move me through with the use of music. Without either happening, it wasn't necessarily boring, but it was suffocating and discombobulating. This need for movement is my fuel for growth, meaning I cannot tolerate the stagnation of stillness, both literally and figuratively. A few days later, I settled into a peaceful routine of beach walks, but the stay was not without its stresses. An unexpected loud exclamation from a boat tour guide during an anxious moment caused a sudden meltdown on a boat trip. More upsetting was witnessing the cruel treatment of elephants near a local park, which deeply disappointed me as I saw the country's national animal being exploited and suffering, leading me to tears and feeling helplessness. The weeks went by, and amazingly, I stopped counting. I no longer wished for time to speed up and embraced a slower pace of life on the island. I think this is what I'd hoped for on this trip. Or maybe I was able to embrace it as it was soon coming to an end, and I knew that while stability is what I craved, My novelty-seeking side would get bored within a few weeks and crave travel once again. The forever swinging pendulum making it sound like I was never happy. But I do remember that my month in Thailand was a real highlight. I eventually stopped feeling suffocated and didn't wish for anything to change. I was happy here, enough to feed both sides of me. However, as I reflected to my friend, my panic attacks came right back on schedule, a few days before we were due to travel yet again. This time it was our biggest flight yet, 14 hours through Dubai to the UK. The recent news of the Air India crash was sending my nervous system into more dysregulation than usual, for my fear of flying had been around for as long as I could remember. There were also reports coming in of a terrorist attack on another tourist-heavy island in Thailand, with Koh Samui being put on alert the morning we left. My husband is thankfully impervious to these things and reassured me that everything would be fine. I was back to counting. Just one boat, one bus, 3 planes, one bed until I'm in Europe. I knew the drill. So instead of being drawn to window screens, I distracted myself as much as possible and focused on simply walking to each transportation carrier. Oh, sweet relief. We landed at Gatwick Airport, somewhat dishevelled but thankful to be in the familiar once again. I'd spent the first 26 years of my life in the UK, but had now been away for 12.5 years living in New Zealand, so it was a real homecoming. We spent the time mostly with my family, exploring the New Forest, Glastonbury, Bristol and Winchester, enjoying woodlands, lakes, English gardens, historic architecture, and even finding a Banksy. The usual pattern of a week of NPC mode continued, and as I took time to settle in to get another new rhythm, this time while staying with family who had their own routine. I didn't write much during this time, which reflects how blank my mind was. Having to adjust to the energy of others was especially mass-provoking, meaning I didn't have much time to think for myself. Instead, I flowed as a river, as we call it in our mindfulness practice center, and went with the needs of the group rather than spending much time reflecting. As such, there isn't much to add here, except that I do recall how quickly I was able to immerse in British culture again, and feeling like the whole Southeast Asia saga was now but a distant dream. I'd been waiting for this for 3 months, and now it was here. There were no bells, no ceremony, and no celebration. Just a lack of longing and wishing I was there already. It felt good, calming, and content. But I wasn't home yet. 3 weeks went by, reminiscent of our speedy 10 days trip through Japan, and there was little time to dwell, but little time to process either. Having completed the final flight, we arrived in Germany for a week-long campsite holiday with my husband's family. Of course, as was now the known rhythm, I immediately fell into NPC mode, exhausted by the travel, and the sudden regression of my independence once again due to the language barrier. This time, however, it was much more immersive, as unlike in Asia, I was now surrounded by my husband's family who only spoke German to each other. I felt stumm, silent, and non-speaking, worried about appearing inconvenient or being unable to communicate, which reminded me of feeling like the lost child in my family growing up, as I was one of four children, all of whom were unlike me, very loud and expertly vocal with their needs. I realized that my ability to interact with strangers relies heavily on letting the other person speak first, and with me then mirroring them, a social pattern that is impossible when we speak different languages. The struggle intensified during a family trip to a nearby spa, which, instead of being quiet, was an excruciating echo chamber of screaming children and noise violating my sensory needs. My usual strategies of relying on visible rules or overhearing others to help me navigate the new were useless, as I couldn't read German signs, leaving me a jumbled up ball of fear and jumpiness. Separated from my husband for gendered showering, I panicked, enduring a quick, dry, cold leg shave pre-swim due to launching into the first shower that I found that happened to be broken. The environment, echoing squeals, wet floors rubbing the skin, bright fluorescent lights, and the thrashing crowds in the tepid jacuzzi pushed me to my limit. causing a shutdown where I couldn't figure out nor articulate what I needed. Only when I attempted to shower for a second time did I suddenly realize, oh, I was cold, and could finally scan and address my basic needs that brought my system back online again. Taking care of these calmed me, but as I sat alone whilst my husband joined his family on the water slide, a profound sadness washed over me, leading to abandon this attempt to have fun and go back to the caravan to write about GOMO, which is the grief of missing out. I realized the pain isn't just about having sensory challenges. I wrote, "There's a profound grief when you suffer in a space where no one else does. It's immensely lonely. On one hand, there's rejection I feel when I'm in a space that says, this hasn't been made for you and you don't belong here. And on the other, I feel rejection from those I'm with, that now I have to leave, worrying that they'll see me as oversensitive, as a killjoy, as no fun." After this event, I surrendered to these feelings and found peace in writing them out, and embraced the rest of this week as a chance to be NPC, to rest and be gentle with myself. The intense hyperfocus of my final month nomading was devoted to securing a new home in Germany and navigating the substantial local bureaucracy, which was made manageable with my in-laws' support. The satisfaction of being reunited with my belongings from New Zealand and the immense fun of reorganizing them was a necessary step before moving into our beautiful, multi-level new space. A moment I marked with a grateful cry, finally feeling home after 11 months of travel. We immediately began building 13 pieces of furniture over 14 days straight from IKEA to make the empty space quickly livable. And yes, my wrists really hurt. So what have I learned from this journey? Looking back, while I feel a profound sense of relief rather than the expected hero's journey empowerment, and I'm now dealing with a new panic disorder, I'm proud of the fact that I faced my fear on this journey. Practically, I learned that I would have been happier if I'd spent more money on accommodation, as cheaper does not mean better, and that staying in the touristy areas would have provided a needed, safer sense of familiarity. Accepting that an NPC week of adjustment is a necessary compromise for my brain's function rather than resisting it would have reduced suffering. Crafts were essential for NPC mode when I had no hyperfocus to absorb into, as they were easy ways to make progress on something without having to think too much. I especially enjoy cross-stitch and doing diamond dot art for their ease and simplicity. No big new things to learn or concentrate on. Speaking of hyperfocuses, one big takeaway was how much I need stability in order to deep dive into things. The consistently shifting environment meant that most of my energy was spent on survival needs rather than being able to take up a new hobby or deep diving into PhD prep, which had been my original intention for this trip. I also realized how much being somewhere where I'm unable to speak the language affected my ability to communicate anything at all, finding that I relied solely on my husband to be the spokesperson and interaction buffer. This has made me see how much I've relied on masking to manage in the world, built on a lifetime of observing, mimicking, and understanding English-speaking individuals, which I was then consequently unable to do abroad. Ultimately, this journey, while affirming Luke Bearden's statement that autism plus environment equals outcome, proved that continuous nomadic life isn't for me. But I regret nothing, as the challenges have given me invaluable self-knowledge and a profound sense of gratitude for home. I will travel again, planning a trip to Italy next year and hopefully back to Japan again in the near future. But I'm very happy to stay put for a while first. So here's a table where I gathered the key concepts that I created on this journey. I don't have time to go through them, but I do hope to use these in my PhD to publish them. And if you do find these helpful, I'll be happy to send you this slide through. Okay, that's me. So thank you so much for your patience, your ears, your listening, and yeah, any questions at all?
I'll just jump in to say that was truly beautiful, Rachel. I don't know if you could scan it all, but there were just great comments supporting you all the way through the chat. People really,
Oh,
really, really
beautiful.
got a lot out of it. I've had the privilege of traveling globally for work, and you made sense of so many of my experiences that I had never really formulated for myself. So thank you for that.
Mm,
I had a similar experience in Japan where everything made more sense to me. I'd love to live there someday.
yes.
And also, thank you for bringing up the animals because um, while I find traveling fairly easy because I'm not even at home in my own culture, so it doesn't really matter where I am, that's the one thing that continually triggers me because I feel like I have more in common with them than the human beings generally. But I'm fine with going over a little today since this was really fascinating. If people want to, if they have questions, I will ask that people use the hand raising icon under the reactions button, or you can just wave in the frame and Roger will see you. And yeah, go ahead. Anybody with any thoughts? Roger can also read some of the choice comments if people are waiting to put their thoughts together. That's fine too.
Yes, there's so much praise in the chat. Uh, I'll read a few examples. Amazing. So much effort was put into sense making. Just want to say huge thank you. Um, Need to leave, but be in touch soon. So I think this is sort of an ongoing dialogue.
Yes.
Um, yeah, definitely applaud your introspective nomadic journey. People loving the visuals. Um, Big compliment on the swinging pendulum as a very accurate description. People loving the chart, asking if they could get a copy of it. So you can let us know
Yes.
later.
Yeah,
Uh,
just send me an email if you're wanting anything. I've left my email address on the screen.
We can also, if you're willing, attach that to the announcement of your talk on the Facebook page.
Hmm.
We often encourage people to go there afterwards and have dialogue and have any questions or whatever. So you might want to check that out and leave as much as you're comfortable leaving.
Oh, great. Yeah, no, I'm happy to do that. That'd be awesome.
yeah, I'll just read some more comments. If anyone wants to, please feel free to jump in if you like. But these are things that I find also very curious. So, object friends is so true. I love that. I believe that was a regard with empathy exhibited towards maybe sort of inanimate things. I can certainly relate to that myself.
Hmm.
The experience is so beautifully articulated. I feel inspired to translate my experience as you did. Uh, I can, I think that's a very moving comment because I think a lot of times we don't know something exists until we sort of hear someone else say it, Um, and since a lot of folks are not acknowledged, then uh, the tendency is to think that it's a problem with self, But when you hear the experiences from other people, then it helps sort of that's knowledge that you can use to move forward.
Hmm. And it's beautiful with the amount of misinformation going on in the world right now about our community. That the lived experience is so vital to share. And this is such a great community to do that as well. Like this whole process of creating the presentation has been incredibly therapeutic for me. It's not just the giving the presentation, the actual process. It's helped me make sense of myself. And like I said, I feel like I'm finding that self-acceptance just by doing this process. So yeah, highly recommend it to anyone.
It's been truly amazing watching people who have tried all kinds of therapies and slogged through so much trauma. And once they immerse in the cultural community here, the healing is just often profound,
Mm.
without even trying, because you can't be a culture of one. You need to see yourself in other people, and that's been really important.
Mm. It's beautiful.
A comment, 11 days traveling without being perceived is my dream. Love that.
Yes.
Sometimes I wish I could put on the Harry Potter cloak.
Mm. For sure.
All right.
It helps to have, a tall bearded guy with you that takes all the attention, but you just have to walk a little bit, away from them.
All right. More compliments. Wonderful presentation. Courageous example for all of us. Let's see here. Definitely a lot of comments about motion. Being in motion, and the experience of that. Um, Someone commenting that walking helps them a lot.
Totally.
To good for processing information, feelings. Um, Me personally, I made a comment about driving for steady driving for distances, not stop and go driving like in traffic, uh, but driving longer distances and how that can also, at least for myself, I find that very calming and good opportunity for information processing.
Hmm. Yeah, it's like active rest.
All right, let me see, go through some more here. Here's a comment here. Uh, I've always described my home as I live in the in-between, and it is where I do my best thinking. You articulated the idea of moving and being happiest when you are physically moving so well. I've never felt like anyone else has understood that before.
Hmm. It's awesome.
This also reminds me of a talk where they're talking about different kinds of cognition, or things that affect cognition, just not just beyond what's in the head or the brain, um, but your environment, your interactions with people, the activities you do, all this stuff sort of affects that. And I think it makes sense to me, and it seems like it's important to respect that,
Hmm.
because if you don't, then you'll cause a lot of the stress to yourself, that is sort of unneeded. Um, but a lot of our, I guess, mental health type of tradition is like very cognitive in terms of, stuff in the head or in the brain. But the idea that it extends much further beyond that, I think is quite liberating, because then you have more things to consider in terms of feeling balanced.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's why I really love the phrase body mind. That is kind of really involved in disability theory. this idea that the mind and the body, that it's not that Cartesian split, that it's all part of the same machine. I think especially autism and ADHD, any form of neurodivergence, neuro, isn't it? It's kind of all seen as, oh, it's all up here and contained in here, but it is the whole system. There is no separation at all.
We talk a lot about that using the term neuroholographic, that
Oh,
there's no dividing line between us as autistic people in this case and our environment. And that's one of the reasons I loved your artwork about like with the light body, basically. It just conveyed that so well, like the physical body almost as residue. I mean, I don't mean that pejoratively, but all of this is happening, on this holographic level. And then sort of the physical is just a byproduct, I guess.
yes. Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of another big hyper focus of mine is this whole idea of being a being of light. Like whenever anyone, I was exploring this last year, the other year when I was in Wellington and trying to unmask, and I go, well, what is unmasking? What am I beneath this persona that I'm putting out there? And I was like, I'm light. How do I explain that to people? So I don't think that you get through the mask and then you find my ego sitting there. It felt like it just sort of bypasses into this sort of etheric sense, this energetic sense of me that I was feeling that it's just really hard to articulate in words, but in the image it all just came out. It's like that's what I feel like.
That is such a beautiful point because I've tried to explain that to people that when I take off the mask, it's not my ego. It's not, because that's, again, that sort of arbitrary individualization that doesn't really exist, but
Yeah.
it's everything. I become everything. So
Yes.
that was beautiful. Thank you for
Yeah.
saying that.
Yeah. I resonate.
There's a comment. Let me read another comment. It says, I also did a 10-day trip. I did it solo, but it was the most incredible trip ever, plus so many rules, which were so helpful, but my PDA totally took a toll too. I think that speaks to sort of the double-edged sword, of growing and learning. You know,
Yeah.
it's on one hand, you need the new information and new experience, to sort things out. But on the other hand, it's just overwhelming sometimes and sort of fraught with change. So, is your sort of this
Yeah.
anxious
Yeah.
tension, uh,
Yeah.
and especially if maybe if this person mentions PDA, if there's all these rules and these sort of demands that don't really quite make sense. I could see that being, quite frustrating. So, uh, definitely, uh, lots to learn about. Sounds like a big self-discovery, but
Yeah.
if one survives it, then you can grow so much from it.
Yeah. And hats off for doing solo travel.
I can speak to it. And basically, because I didn't at that point, I wasn't um, at all aware of any of it. And Japan was absolutely wonderful. But I think I found myself getting overwhelmed with the. I needed the like. I loved the rules at first, but then I basically started to rebel. You know, and so that just kind of it just opened things up for me, especially now because I did this trip where I can look back and say, okay, well now I understand and I have an awareness about it. But
Yeah, that's so interesting. Just having that PDA response to the rules. I'm imagining kind of you're walking down the street with the whole don't eat with, you're not allowed to eat from vendors whilst walking down the street. And just the beautiful thing about Japan, though, is that nobody's going to say anything either. It's still quite a respectful. They might point to a sign, but you're not going to get slapped or chased down the street or anything. But yeah,
As we wind down, I want to sort of circle around to what you were saying early on, Rachel, and people are always welcome to do whatever helps them feel comfortable in the sessions or online. We have many social media accounts. Roger can put the Discord in there, and certainly people can email me if they have concerns or things that they would like to have accommodated. We're always open to that. And yes, I just can't say how much I appreciate this. It's so brave. It's so brave to sit there in that seat and share your experiences on that level. Just so emotionally brave. And I so appreciate you, Rachel.
Thank you so much. It's been really good fun actually. It's been like a load off.
I'm so glad you did brilliantly. If anybody else has one more comment or question, I think we have time for that. Or if not, Roger can read another comment to close us out.
Sure, there's one comment. One more comment here. Also, travel is a liminal state in between two destinations, and it almost feels like a different sense of self.
Beautiful. Betwixt and between. I love the liminal states. Yeah, it definitely feels like, yeah, I could definitely feel the difference between who I was then, and having to constantly shift and change and evolve, whereas now it feels like I'm able to be sturdy and more rooted. There's definitely a difference between the selves.
I love that concept of liminality. I think that's the perfect place to sort of leave things. I love that concept because it does capture the internal and the external and the spiritual and all of it, right? The cultural. So beautiful. Just want to give a quick shout out that I won't show her because she doesn't like being online, but my sister is here visiting, and she got to see, this was her first session that she's ever seen since we started Casey, and what a great one. What a great one for her to see.
That's really cool.
Great. Well, everybody, however you get a hold of us in Discord, Facebook, email, whatever, we have many more amazing events coming up. Many of them international this year. We've sort of branched out, and then of course our standard personal stories of people's lived experience, because all of those things are so important. So keep checking in. We're here for you, and take care out there, and we'll see you really soon.